At the beginning, it never looks like strength. It looks like softness, like patience, like someone who keeps giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when the evidence says otherwise. They don't rush to judge. They don't react immediately. They don't meet harshness with harshness. Instead, they absorb, they take in tone, behavior, subtle shifts in energy. They notice what's said and what's avoided. They feel the intention behind actions, not just the actions themselves. And because of that, they tend to pause where others would react. Most people misunderstand this phase completely. They see someone who isn't pushing back, and they assume there's nothing there. They mistake understanding for weakness. They think patience means tolerance without limits. But what they don't see is what's happening beneath the surface. Every interaction is being processed, not in a loud analytical way, but in a quiet, constant awareness. Patterns begin to form. Small inconsistencies start connecting. A tone used here, repeated there. A behavior dismissed once, then seen again under slightly different circumstances. And over time, those moments stop being isolated. They become a pattern that can't be ignored. But even then, the empath doesn't jump straight to confrontation. That's not their first instinct. Their instinct is to understand, to ask, is there something I'm missing? Is there a reason behind this behavior? They give space, they give time, they give chances, more chances than most people would ever offer. And this is where the real shift begins. Because while they're giving chances, they're also adapting. They start adjusting how much they share, how they respond, how much energy they invest in certain interactions. It's subtle at first, almost unnoticeable to anyone who isn't paying close attention, but it's happening. They're learning what triggers certain responses, learning what's genuine and what's performative, learning where the boundaries should have been from the beginning. So while it looks like nothing is changing on the outside, internally, everything is being recalibrated. They're not staying the same. They're becoming more precise, more aware, more selective. And the person on the other side often has no idea. They think everything is fine because there hasn't been a confrontation. They assume the lack of reaction means acceptance. They interpret calmness as permission to continue, but what they're actually seeing is the early stage of transformation, because an empath doesn't break suddenly, they evolve quietly. And by the time that evolution becomes visible, it's already too late to go back to how things were. What most people call tolerance is often completely misread. From the outside, it looks like someone is putting up with too much, letting things slide, staying quiet when they should speak, giving chances when they should walk away. So people assume it's weakness, but that assumption misses what's actually happening beneath the surface. Because for someone who is highly aware of emotions and behavior, patience isn't passive. It's active. It's observation. It's data collection happening in real time. Every interaction becomes information. They're noticing how someone reacts under pressure, how their tone shifts when they don't get what they want, how consistent their words are with their actions. They're paying attention to the small details most people ignore, because those details reveal patterns, and patterns reveal truth. So while it may look like they're allowing behavior, what they're really doing is studying it, not in a cold or calculated way, but in a way that seeks clarity before action. They don't jump to conclusions. They verify. They give situations enough time to show their real nature, because they understand something important. Anyone can behave well temporarily. Anyone can say the right things once or twice, but over time, consistency or the lack of it becomes impossible to hide. And that's what they're waiting for: consistency. They're watching to see if respect is real or just situational, if kindness is genuine or convenient, if apologies lead to change or just reset the cycle. And every time the same pattern repeats, the data becomes clearer, the picture sharpens. But here's where it becomes dangerous for the other person, because all of this is happening quietly. There's no running commentary. No constant calling out of behavior, no dramatic reactions that signal you're crossing a line. Instead, there's calmness, there's space, there's what appears to be acceptance, and that creates a false sense of security. The other person starts believing they're getting away with it, that nothing is being noticed, that the empath either doesn't see it or doesn't mind, but in reality, everything is being recorded emotionally, mentally, behaviorally, not to be used against anyone in a manipulative way, but to reach a point of undeniable clarity. Point where there's no confusion left. No more, maybe it was a bad day. No more, maybe I misunderstood. Just a clear, consistent pattern that answers every question without needing to ask it again. And once that clarity is reached, something shifts, because tolerance has a limit, but awareness doesn't forget. So what looked like endless patience was never endless at all. It was a process of watching, learning, and understanding until there's nothing left to question. And when that moment arrives, the response isn't emotional, it's informed. Most people expect a breaking point to be loud. They imagine raised voices, long messages, emotional reactions, some clear moment where everything spills out at once, something dramatic enough to signal this is where it ends. But when it comes to someone who has been observing, processing, and holding space for a long time, it rarely happens that way, because by the time they reach that point, the emotions have already been felt. They've already gone through the frustration, the confusion, the internal conversations trying to make sense of things. They've already replayed situations, given the benefit of the doubt, questioned themselves, and then slowly stopped questioning. So when the actual breaking point arrives, it doesn't come with intensity. It comes with clarity. There's no need to raise their voice because they're no longer trying to be understood. There's no need to explain every detail because they've already explained enough, either out loud or internally. And there's no need to fight for the connection because they've already seen what it is and what it isn't. From the outside, it can feel sudden. One day, everything seems normal. The next, something is different. The tone shifts, the energy changes, the availability disappears. But what looks like a sudden switch is actually the result of a long, quiet process, a process that reached its conclusion without needing an announcement. And this is where most people get caught off guard because they were expecting a warning. They were expecting a confrontation, a final argument, something that would give them a chance to respond, to adjust, to fix things in the moment. But that moment never comes because all the chances were already given, just not in the way they recognized. They came in the form of patience, in the form of overlooked behavior, in the form of staying when leaving would have been easier. And once those chances run out, there's nothing left to negotiate. So instead of an explosion, there's a withdrawal, a calm, controlled step back, less engagement, fewer responses, a noticeable absence of emotional investment. The same situations that once triggered discussion now receive silence or nothing at all, and that silence carries a different weight. It's not confusion. It's not hesitation. It's final. Because when someone reaches a point where they no longer feel the need to explain how they feel, it usually means they've already accepted what the situation is. And acceptance doesn't argue, it doesn't chase, it doesn't try to change what's already been clearly understood. It simply adjusts behavior to match reality. And once that adjustment happens, access begins to close, gradually at first, then completely. No dramatic ending, no loud exit, just a quiet shift that changes everything. And by the time it becomes obvious to the other person, it's no longer a phase, it's a decision. Because the real breaking point isn't when emotion peaks, it's when emotion settles into certainty. After a certain point, something changes that most people don't expect. Because when someone is known for their emotional depth, their understanding, their ability to feel and connect, people assume that part of them is always available, always accessible, no matter what happens. But that assumption only holds until a line is crossed too many times. And when that happens, the response isn't more emotion. It's less, not because they suddenly stop feeling, but because they stop offering those feelings to the same place that kept mishandling them. There's a difference. The emotion doesn't disappear. It gets redirected or withheld. What used to be warmth becomes neutral. What used to be effort becomes minimal. What used to be understanding becomes distance. And to someone who is used to receiving that empathy, the shift feels unfamiliar, almost unsettling, because they don't recognize this version. They're used to reactions, to patience, to being met with consideration, even when they didn't fully deserve it. So when that pattern breaks, it creates confusion. They might try the same behaviors that once worked, the same tone, the same approach, expecting the same response, but it doesn't land anymore because the access point is no longer open. This is where emotional detachment comes in, not as a punishment, but as protection. It's a boundary that doesn't need to be announced. A quiet internal decision that says, this is no longer a space where my emotional energy is safe to invest. And once that decision is made, the change is consistent. There's no going back and forth, no temporary reactions followed by re-engagement. It's steady, predictable in a different way. Person who once absorbed everything now filters everything. They choose what affects them and what doesn't. They stop internalizing behavior that used to drain them. And that creates a kind of calm that can be misread. From the outside, it might look like indifference. Like they don't care anymore, but that's not entirely accurate. It's not that they don't care. It's that they've stopped caring in the same way, at the same level, in the same direction. Because caring without boundaries eventually leads to exhaustion. And once someone reaches that level of exhaustion, they don't respond by giving more. They respond by giving differently or not at all. There's also a level of clarity that comes with this detachment. Without emotional investment clouding perception, they start seeing situations more objectively. They're no longer influenced by hope, by potential, or by what things could be. They see what is. And that clarity reinforces the distance because once you see something clearly, it's hard to go back to pretending you don't. So the detachment stays, not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of understanding, an understanding that some connections only work when one person keeps giving more than they should. And once that imbalance is recognized, the only way to restore stability is to step back. And when that step back is taken, it doesn't come with noise. It comes with a quiet kind of finality. Before that shift happens, there's usually a phase where they try to fix things with words. They explain how they feel. They point out patterns carefully, calmly, often giving the other person more credit than they deserve. They try to create understanding, not conflict, because their goal isn't to win an argument. It's to restore balance. So they talk, they clarify, they give examples. They choose their words in a way that avoids blame, but still communicates impact. And more often than not, they do this multiple times, adjusting how they say it, hoping that maybe this time it will land differently. But something important is happening during this phase. They're paying attention to the response, not just the words that come back, but the behavior that follows, whether anything actually changes, whether the same patterns repeat, just with new explanation, whether the effort is mutual or one-sided. And over time, a realization starts to form. Words don't mean much without consistent action. At first, they might question themselves. Maybe they didn't explain it clearly enough. Maybe they're expecting too much. Maybe they should be more patient, more understanding, more flexible. So they try again. But every time the same issue resurfaces, it reinforces something deeper. Not just frustration, but clarity. Clarity that the problem isn't communication, it's alignment. And once that becomes clear, the need to keep explaining starts to fade. Because explaining only works when the other person is genuinely willing to understand and adjust. When that willingness isn't there, words become repetition, and repetition becomes exhaustion. So instead of continuing the cycle, they stop. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but decisively. They stop bringing things up. They stop trying to fix what isn't being fixed. They stop investing energy into conversations that lead nowhere. And this is where the real shift becomes visible. Because when someone who used to explain everything suddenly becomes quiet, it changes the dynamic completely. There's no more back and forth, no more opportunities to smooth things over with temporary words, no more emotional engagement to rely on, just a change in behavior. Become less available, less reactive, less involved, not out of spite, but out of decision. And that decision speaks louder than anything they said before, because behavior is harder to ignore than words. Words can be debated, dismissed, or misunderstood. But consistent change in behavior creates a reality that can't be argued with. It forces the other person to face something they may have been avoiding, the fact that the connection is no longer functioning the same way. And by the time that realization hits, the window for explanation has already closed because the time for words was earlier. Now it's about action or the absence of it. And once someone reaches the point where they no longer feel the need to explain themselves, it usually means one thing: they've already said everything that needed to be heard. There's a final shift that happens, and it's the one most people never see coming, because everything that once made them gentle, their awareness, their emotional depth, their ability to understand people on a deeper level doesn't disappear after they've been pushed too far. It sharpens. At the beginning, that sensitivity is used to connect, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to see the good even when it's inconsistent. They interpret behavior through empathy, through context, through possibility. But after repeated patterns, after clarity replaces confusion, that same sensitivity starts working differently. It stops filtering reality through hope and starts seeing it as it is. There's no more over-explaining someone else's behavior, no more justifying actions that don't match words, no more stretching understanding to cover what's clearly misaligned. Because once patterns become undeniable, empathy no longer distorts perception, it refines it. They begin to see people with precision, not just what they say, but what they consistently do. Not just how they act in good moments, but who they are across time. They notice the gaps between intention and action, between effort and excuse. And those gaps speak louder than anything else. This is where the real change happens, because when someone can see clearly without emotional bias, their decisions become different. Not reactive, not impulsive, but calculated in a quiet, grounded way. They don't need conflict to make a move. They don't need closure in the form of long conversations or dramatic endings. They already have what they need: understanding. And once understanding is complete, action becomes simple. They step back, not as a test, not to create a reaction, not to see if the other person will chase or change, but because staying no longer makes sense. There's no anger driving it, no need to prove a point, just a calm recognition that continuing would mean ignoring everything they've already seen. And they don't ignore what they understand. This is what makes their exit different. It's not emotional. It's intentional. They don't look back for validation. They don't reopen doors out of habit. They don't revisit decisions they've already thought through from every angle. Because when someone who sees deeply finally decides to leave, it's not based on a moment. It's based on a pattern they've studied, felt, questioned, and finally accepted. And once acceptance replaces doubt, there's nothing left to negotiate. So they move forward with the same awareness, the same depth, but now with clearer boundaries and sharper judgment. The empathy is still there. It's just no longer given where it isn't respected. And that's the part most people realize too late. The same person who once understood everything now understands exactly why they had to walk away.